Aloha, this is Rosa McAllister, and welcome back to On Being a Service Warrior, interviews with the firewalkers among us. Those who have had their struggles and yet have chosen to come out the other side into lives of service for others. Click subscribe and tap the notification bell to keep up with future episodes of this ongoing series. If this is your first time joining us, don't forget to catch up with other episodes in this series, as well as other offerings in Network's YouTube channel. Mahalo, thank you, and always remember you are the light. Be the light. Aloha, listeners, and the joy just keeps coming. Ginny Focht-New is another wonderful friend and former neighbor of mine in southeastern Pennsylvania. And like some other great interviewees I've had on this show, Ginny and I go back many years now. We met through our work in the disability rights movement and learned we shared many of the same passions in this area, but also in many other areas of life. Our kids went to the same school. We were conscious about eating and lifestyle and spirituality and yoga and other things. And in more recent years, we have shared even more as we have both moved more into trauma-based work. And with this, owning more of our own traumas and our own life challenges. Ginny is a soft but mighty warrior, a genuine and honest and knowledgeable teacher, a wonderful and caring therapist, and the kind of friend we all need. Ginny, mahalo, thank you for being willing to share with us today. So glad you're here. Folks, another treat for you, Ginny Focht-New.
Thank you, Rosa. Thank you for including me in this whole wonderful group of interviews. I'm happy to be here with you for an hour or so. It's lovely.
And it's fun seeing you and visiting with you too in your home, which I haven't been in for many years. So I've already shared with you a series of questions, about 4 or 5 questions that I've been generally asking my interviewees. And I've also mentioned to you in writing, and we discussed just a little bit ago, and I'll say it again, that in no way are we doing therapy here. This is just an interview, and so it's whatever you think is pertinent and you want us to know and you wish to share. I will not be asking additional probing questions. I don't believe in doing that. And as we both know, particularly with those of us that have lived some tough stuff in life, you don't throw monkey wrenches at people. That's just not very nice. That's just not very fair for anybody, but particularly of those of us that maybe are a little bit more thin-skinned about surprises and things like that. So first question that I love to ask everyone, and I'm asking you is, so who are you? Who is Ginny?
Well, let's see. Several things jump into my mind. First of all, I don't know, this is in no particular order, really. So I am a Nana. It's one of my favorite things to be. It is a way for me to engage with little people and hang out with them and feel their joy and their love. And they're a wonderful distraction in a world that's so crazy sometimes that the only way that I ever get a break from it is if I just say, hey, I want grandkids to come over for the weekend, and I can spend a couple of days just playing and talking and reading and doing things like that. I am someone, as I was thinking about the questions, I was reminded that when I was a little kid, and we had a house on Long Beach Island, which is in New Jersey, I had a friend that had a house across the street, and I used to go and sit with my friend, and I was the teacher, and she was the student. And here I am, probably, I don't know, 55, 59 years later, still being the teacher. and with any number of students. And all the years in between, the things that I always really loved to do, and the things that it turned out that I was pretty good at, was being a teacher. So when I was a nurse, I'm still a nurse, but when I was a nurse working in the hospital, I would teach people about their surgery, or I would teach people after their surgery, and they were always really quite appreciative that I was explaining to them what they could expect. I continue to do that as I teach for a university now, but years and years I've done it with direct care staff, because when you're talking about us being service warriors, service can start at a very young age, right? But in all the years that I've been working, empowering, educating, informing, creating empathy in the people that provide services to the folks that we care about the most directly, I think has been a focus of my life's work. I think that you labeled me in several different ways, and something that I do hear from people a lot is that they think I'm a very kind person, and that is and has been for a very long time my intention. I feel like I'm not somebody that takes things personally. I'm much more about taking people seriously. And so when people talk to me or they push back or things like that, I try to be open to that and not feel like, oh my gosh, there's something terribly wrong with me. I do think that about myself sometimes, but I think we'll get to that. It doesn't have to do, though, when I'm working with students. What else am I?
How would you say, you've already mentioned this a little bit, but how would you say others, your grandkids, your husband, good friends, how would they describe Ginny? If they were in the room, what might they be saying? Don't forget to say this, Ginny, or you should say this, or they'd be jumping in behind you and saying, this is what she really.
I think they would add kind, loving. They tell me all the time that I rock a lot, because when you've worked with people that have a lot of challenges for a very long time, and then you kind of hang out with your family, you can be really creative and think about things, come up with ideas to do with kids and adults that just seem so easy after working with people that have pretty serious challenges, trying to engage with somebody that's not verbal. Well, it's, kids I can do that with. So I think that they would say that I am really creative, and I speak to the children in such a way that they feel really held. They can come to visit me. They could have maybe some challenges at home, but I don't see those challenges because I think of the way that I interact with them and I speak with them. I treat them like they understand things, and they don't understand things, and I help them understand. I'm not at all critical or judgmental of people. What else would they want me to tell you? I'm really, in some ways, very shy, and especially about talking about myself. That's not always so easy to do. I'm much more focused on like helping other people, or engaging with other people, or empowering other people, than I am about saying who I am and how I am.
Right.
I think they would say I'm thoughtful. Yeah, I'm really honest, but not
You are.
blunt. I'm honest with people, but I'm honest with myself also. If I make a mistake, I own up to my mistakes. And again, I would go back to, we've had all kinds of experiences,
Right.
and our what we can tolerate in our life, I think, can be compared to the kinds of things that you've already been through. So there's some things that seem to be easier to do, like be honest. Hey, I made a mistake. And that's not so hard to do when you've been through other kinds of experiences that can be really harmful to you.
Right. Right. I would agree with all that you've said and then some. So, thank you. The second question is, both of us have been with many, many people, as you've mentioned, and people who wear all kinds of different labels and have had a lot of challenges in their past and their current life and all of that. And, one of the things that I've been really involved with and interested in hearing people's life story, and I know you as well. And I always find it so interesting that most of us, at least in my experience, focus on specific events or kind of markers in time. And I've done timelines with people where we put together the markers in time and all of that. And more recently, what I've really come to love is hearing people kind of think in broader chapters of their life, and not so much the specific events, but the chapters. And so I'm wondering if you would share with us some of the chapters of your life, whether they're actually named chapters. I don't know if you've written that book yet, but or maybe it's a telemovie or who knows what. But just giving us kind of a hint of who is Ginny in terms of the chapters of her life and what you've lived through. And again, as much as you're willing to share with us.
It's interesting because when I saw that we would be talking about that, first I really liked the idea of thinking about my life in terms of chapters. So I did spend a little bit of time thinking about where, and then when I jotted down some notes, and when we were talking earlier, I realized that I missed some really important chapters in my life. So I think I should start with the beginning and not in the middle, after things, And I'd say the first chapter of my life, I would name Eagle's Nest, because there was a long period of time as I was growing up when I, of course, lived with my mother and my father and my sister and my brother. And they had an extensive number of friends who we called aunts and uncles. And we would all experience our aunts and uncles and cousins in the summertime, because we had a summer house that everybody would go to. And on 4th of July, 100 people would show up because all our friends would invite all their family, and there would be a kids parade, and it was a really amazing time. And that has been so important to me, I think, to be loved by so many people all throughout my childhood. It was really quite incredible. And as I grew up, I'll come back, but as I grew up, one of the things that my family might say about me is that I'm always doing things. Like, I always want to cook something for a large group of people. And they're like, why do you do that? Well, because we used to have 100 people come to this picnic, and I was used to big barbecue and making giant things of potato salad with my family, and all of that. Having lots of people in our life was just no big deal. And in fact, it was joyful and amazing and comforting, to have all those people. So I'd say that was a major part of my life, and really sort of set the scene for everything else after that. I don't know what I would call the next period of my life, which I would say started when I was age 13, and then didn't end maybe, well, it informed a lot more after this, but there was a period of time, 13 to 20, where this all started with my mom dying. And it happened quite suddenly, where she had leukemia and became very ill very quickly and died within 2 months, which just totally changed the rest of my life because of that. And
Wow.
and I can remember my dad saying to me, because I was the oldest and I had just turned 13. So when I see my grandkids turn 13, I look at them and I go, yeah, I was a whole different person when I was 13. You get to have the joys of your childhood. And mine it was essentially gone. My dad said to me, you and we have to be strong because your brother and sister, who are younger than me, don't really understand what happened. And not that how could I possibly understand
Oh my gosh.
what happened, right?
You were still a baby yourself. Absolutely. Just a baby, yeah. And needing, I'm sure, so much love yourself.
Oh my gosh. And then had a dad that hadn't, I was born in the 50s. So as you can imagine, mothers and fathers had particular roles.
Right.
And one of the roles for fathers was not raising children. And so, I became a pseudo parent really for my brother and sister, at least for a little while, until my father decided to get remarried. And I'll just say that whole thing didn't go well. If we can imagine the proverbial evil stepmother. Had, at the time, how do you understand that when you're a kid? You don't. But as an adult, looking back, I could see how her own trauma history informed the way that she was a parent to us, and that she all of a sudden had a 5-year-old and 3 teenagers, which most of us, even when we ease into being a parent of a teenager, don't find that to be so easy. But luckily for me, I had all that joyous time and could understand that perhaps what we were experiencing shouldn't be happening. A couple of things that was kind of good that came out of it. I became a really amazing pool player.
Pool as in billiards pool?
As in billiards, exactly. My dad had a pool table and it was down in the basement, and I had to watch my brother and sister every day after school. And I was like, oh, come on. And so I would go down and I would play pool. And I had a girlfriend in the neighborhood. They had a pool table too. She showed me some things, but pretty soon I was not just beating her, but I was beating the boys too. And that was a skill that stayed with me for a number of years, actually. I was really quite good. And later, when I was in my 20s and I was playing pool, I was actually the women's pool champ at Bloomsburg University.
Oh my goodness.
And I was really upset because I felt like I should have been playing in the men's tournament.
Yeah.
And I should have been playing in the men's tournament because after that, I had been invited to join a men's league, which I kind of turned down because I had too many other things going on. But yeah, I was like the real deal. We would go to the Zieglerville Hotel and people would put quarters on the table because that's how much it costs to play pool. And guys would come up and put quarters on the table to challenge me. And I can't tell you how many guys came back and took their quarter off the table.
Awesome. Oh my gosh, this is this
play.
whole other view of Ginny. I love it.
So I can't really explain how that, I mean, it was part of, who I became, being able to hang out with guys in that way. I mean, that was something that when I was in college, I was not so uncomfortable with guys. But if we just go back for a second, I will say that, when people come into your life that have had their own trauma experiences and don't have any coping strategies for how to handle that, it actually introduces the people who are around them to being traumatized. It increases the chances that the people they are in contact with have,
Yes.
Trauma as well. So I got set up, in that way. And that was really quite hard. And even though I left for college when I was 17, and really essentially never came back, that was a profound experience, and very hard, and something that took a long time in order to be able to live with the consequences of all of that time frame, because the trauma didn't stop then. It continued even into my college years.
Wow.
So,
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, the bad news was bad then, right? Now, I think that if somebody said something, not my family wouldn't say this to me, but maybe some of my friends would, that I'm a really good trauma therapist, that I'm really understanding and empathetic. So the other thing that my friends and family might say about me is that I'm really flexible. I would say that my next period, so my whole education has gone from being first a college dropout, because I dropped out of Bloomsburg. I just wasn't prepared. I mean, all the things that had happened in the years right before that just did not prepare me to be able to concentrate on learning anything.
Yeah.
I mean, it's seriously a consequence of all of that. So
No surprise. No surprise at
exactly.
all. Hindsight, once again, if only we saw some of that at the time it was occurring, but that makes perfect sense.
Yeah,
Plus you were a pool shark, so what the heck?
yeah, right the heck. um, and so it was after that, I'd say that my next period started, which was getting my first real job. And I got my first real job because I really needed a job, and that job paid $5 an hour. And it was working as a direct care staff person at Penhurst. And I worked there for about, I guess, 3 or 4 years. And even then, looking back, but even at the time, I remember sitting outside waiting to be called in for my interview. And I'm looking across this field, and running across the field is a naked person. And I said to myself, oh, isn't that interesting? It is hot out. I totally get wanting to take your clothes off and run across the field. It never even fazed me that
Wow.
this naked person was somebody that I could potentially be taken care of, right?
Right. And if I can interrupt just for a minute, because there might be people listening in, what's Penhurst?
Yeah, exactly. So Penhurst was this was in 1972, so a super long time ago. And Penhurst was a state institution in Pennsylvania, not unlike all the other state institutions in Pennsylvania and other states in the US. Not while I was there, but eventually there was a lawsuit brought against Penhurst for the way that people were treated, and rightfully so, because, I tell people I learned a lot about what not to do to people when I worked at Penhurst. And I was, I guess, a different kind of staff person because I couldn't really understand why people didn't have more regular opportunities. And this is an example. People would donate tons and tons of clothes, and the lockers in the locker room were stuffed with all these clothes. And I would pull out these clothes that were terribly wrinkled, no ironing board whatsoever. This was before permanent press, I'm sure. And I would dress people in regular clothes because they were wearing these outfits that were one size fits all. They were one step above canvas. They were the roughest cotton I could ever even imagine. And when I was in high school, I'd learned to sew. And so this was just, I didn't like this because I felt like this is, I don't know, who would want to wear that stuff, right? People didn't even own their own underwear, no less wear underwear sometimes. And nobody really cared about that. So I learned a lot during that time. And at the time, I was told that people had a particular diagnosis, that folks were profound and severe. Not that I really understood what that was. I only understood that what that was based on the people that I was working with. So these people are this. And it wasn't until later that I learned that actually that wasn't even close to being true. We worked really hard because often there were only two of us, and there could be 30 people living in the place where we were working. We were all locked in to a day room together, and periodically would take people out and show them the bathroom and take them and try to feed people, two people at a time, because otherwise somebody would come along and take their food if we didn't try to work really hard to do that. And so we did things that were acceptable then, and that you would be arrested for today. And that is a big part of who I am and how I teach, because I often go back to that experience and say to people, don't think for 1 second that we're past that we can treat people in this way today, in 2020, in a person's own home. Because
Absolutely.
as long as I make a decision for somebody else, I am putting them in a place where I am making decisions for them, that I am using my power over them. And I can institutionalize people in their own home because of the way that I behave. So I tell stories from that because even though it was, 40 years ago, it is unfortunately, in some ways, and at some points in time, still relevant to the teaching that we do today. Anyway, so that was my work period. While I was there, I was inspired by a woman who was a nurse, and I thought, I'd really be interested in doing what she does, and I think I could do it. So I left Pennhurst and I went to nursing school. I became an LPN. I've been to school in every way that you could possibly go, starting from being, a dropout, to getting a certificate, to getting an associate degree, a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and then finally a PhD. So I've done it all. I probably could have done it earlier, but again, my whole history, losing my mom and that time period just affected my ability to really demonstrate that I actually was a fairly smart person, smarter than I even realized. And so I went to nursing school and I found another way to care for people. And I found that I was pretty good at working with people in a couple of different ways. First of all, that I am a pretty empathetic and compassionate person, especially when working with people who have had a death in their family, or with people who were dying. I mean, one of my first jobs, my first day on the job, somebody set me up with a woman who was dying of lung cancer. And I sat with her and talked to her and held her hand and watched her die on my very first day working in this nursing home. The other thing that I had learned had a lot to do with the people that I worked with at Pennhurst. And I didn't mention this, and I should, because it is really quite important. But the people that I worked with were people who had the most challenging behavior. So they were the people who were most violent toward themselves and toward other people. And so I'd gotten used to figuring out maybe how to work with people to kind of reduce that reaction that they might have. And so when I went to work in my practicum, in my mental health practicum, I went to a state hospital, mental state hospital, Norristown State Hospital, and I worked in the forensic unit because people were acutely ill. And if we had any chance at all of making a difference in 6 or 8 weeks of a practicum, these were the folks that we might actually have a chance to make a difference with. And I had this really highfalutin, 4-part harmony, very detailed care plan for the person that I was going to be working with. And every week that I met with my field instructor, I'd say, oh, guess what? I've changed my care plan. And every week I took out things and I kept saying, yeah, I don't think this is going to happen. And this is not a good match, until my final care plan, for which I got an A, was that I would try to be a person who was different than the other people who had been in this person's life. And that was kind of not so easy to achieve, although that was the best I could do. This person had schizophrenia and was really quite paranoid and was really afraid of me and other people, until the day that we decided that we would play a game of pool. And it turned out that we won every single time. And sometimes other people would come up and say, can you be my partner? And the guy would say, oh no, she's my partner. And that was the way that we connected. Mm-hmm. And it changed our ability to be able to actually focus on something that might have been important to him. And that still informs me today in how I engage in therapy with people. You want to talk to me about your bologna sandwich? I'm fine with that. Because in my experience, all roads lead back to the trauma. So we start with a bologna sandwich. Let's do it. Because eventually I know that we're going to be talking about things that happened. I guess the next chapter in my life was going back into, I worked in a hospital for a while as part of all of that. After I worked in the nursing home, because jobs are really hard to get at that time. And then I had an opportunity to go be a nurse and work for a division of a large agency. And again, when I started working for this agency, some new people came in and said, you know, we really should be working with people who are most vulnerable and most challenging. So about a third of the people that lived in this place got moved on to places where they could, you know, take a bus to go to work because they could know how to do that. And we replaced all those people with folks that came out of institutions, people who were in danger of being in an institution. And most of them had been heavily medicated they had been placed in units where they were isolated and sometimes segregated from other people because, again, they were violent or they had, self-injurious kinds of behaviors. So once again, I was working with all these folks. It was a good thing that I was young then. I was still in my 20s, because people would like run away and we would have to run after them. Even as the nurse, there were lots of things that I ended up doing because we were all in this together. And so again, educating people and helping them be empathetic and compassionate toward the folks that we were working with. So during this time, I was up to working on my master's degree, and that meant my focus was becoming a psychiatric nurse. And I started one day, so I moved from being a nurse into an administrative position. So 18 years at this agency, I probably spent 4 years as a direct nurse, and the other 14 years as an administrator of some kind. First in nursing, and then for the entire for the entire division of this organization, ending up being the director of the organization. One day I was still the director, and I was getting incident reports, and we had some people that got into a lot of trouble. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do about this. There has to be something. We've been doing this for years, the same thing over and over again. I think I should take all these people and I should put them in a room and get them to talk to each other about, why are you doing this? And so I decided to do that. And we started a support group. And I had Bruce, my husband, the dishwasher emptier, become the co-facilitator of the group. And we invited all these guys who were really problematic. I decided, based on my own experience of watching some big-time therapists do therapy with people that, couples, Murray Bowen did this thing where he met with a couple and two couples watched, and the couples watching said, I got a lot more out of the session when I watched than when I was the focus couple. And so it made me think that all our friends, most of the people that I'd ever worked with who were not able to verbalize what they were thinking or feeling, all my years in Benhurst, all my years at this place, majority of people couldn't talk. So I said half of the group needs to be people who can't talk. And then, because I can't have all these guys in the same room together without having somebody there as some kind of support, I wanted to invite caregivers. But I didn't want them to be there as bodyguards. I called each one up and I said, I'd like to invite you to be part of this support group. And here's the deal. If you join the group, you're a member of the group. You can talk or not talk. That's the rule for everybody in the group. So if you choose to join, we would love to have you. And so we had 3 or 4 staff who agreed to be a part of this join. It was the most amazing experience. So I would say that this was in the early 90s, maybe. So it's long before, we're talking about, maybe now people run some groups with folks that have, intellectual differences. I'm talking about way before that we were doing this.
And I was going to interrupt, if I can, just
sure.
to highlight that this was very, very novel, like beyond novel, because the people you are very nicely, genuinely describing are people that others had chalked up as not being able to, not only did they not speak, they're not able to think, they're not able to this, they're all kinds of labels. And here you are suggesting that they come for group therapy.
Most of them were with us because nobody else would serve them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it was a crazy and wonderful time for many of us because we had the permission, because things had been so god awful and there were so many lawsuits, Pennhurst being one of them, that we had the luxury of almost being able to try anything at that point, as long as it wasn't, illegal, immoral, not dangerous, etc. And we had some of the most cockamamie ideas, including yours, which thank goodness we did. And thank you for doing that.
Sure. It was changing for all of us.
Yeah.
Everybody that was in the group was changed by this.
Sure. I am sure.
Yeah, we'd go around the room and we would give everybody a minute to talk about anything they wanted. And when we would get to somebody who couldn't talk, I wouldn't let anybody speak for a minute. I'd say, this is your minute. I know you can't, I wish you could tell us something that you're thinking. But at the moment, we can't figure out how to make that happen. So we're going to just honor you in this minute. And it was really hard, mainly for the staff, not to talk, to sit in silence for a minute, several times in the group. We got to a point where we would talk about those things. And so one day we said, let's talk about doing things that might hurt somebody else. And so I asked the group to go around and talk about any time that they had ever hit somebody else. And I said, brothers and sisters are included. And so we went around the room and literally everybody acknowledged, staff included, that they hit somebody else, except for one person. I guess maybe they didn't have brothers or sisters, or they weren't comfortable being honest, or maybe they had a beautiful childhood or something. I don't know. They were a perfect kid. And so it was great because was stunning to the folks that we had invited in who had all these challenges and were hitting people a lot of the time. And to find out that, guess what? The people that were their caregivers had also been in the same situation. So then we went around and said, if you don't hit anybody anymore, talk about how you went about doing that. And why? Tell us about that. And so people went around and said, here's what I decided, here's how I stopped, and they went through all of that. It was really quite amazing. And one day, one of the staff said, my father died. And it just became this whole thing, this outpouring of empathy from people in the group toward this man for his father dying. After group, he just could not get over how kind and caring these people were toward him. He didn't expect it. It just was overwhelming to him. So it changed all of us. The folks that were doing the caregiving learned that the people that they were, that they were caring for actually had similar experiences and also the same kind of desire to care for other people. And the folks that were, that were getting the services, that were there because they had some challenges, learned that, guess what? Maybe this isn't because I have this diagnosis. Maybe I'm a regular person when it comes to my feelings about somebody dying. Anyway, that was a big learning curve. And that led me to, when I left there, I went and worked for a HICU where training became a big part of my focus. And then I got sucked back into being an administrator again.
What's a HICU?
HICU, a healthcare quality unit, of which I guess there's still 7 in Pennsylvania. We were in the Southeast region. So we worked with all of the agencies within the in the 5-county area: Philadelphia, Chester, Delaware, Montgomery, and Bucks County. And so
And
we would be contacted if people had some problems. They needed somebody to come and help them figure out what to do. They needed technical assistance or training, or something like that. So again, we were called in on for the folks that were what they might be labeled as high-end users, the people that had trouble finding an agency that was willing to support them because they were so very challenging, even more so than the last group that I worked with.
Right. Yeah. And these folks, just to clarify again, this is within the disability world, quote unquote, the
Yes.
disability world. So these were agencies, human service agencies, of which you had worked for a large one,
Yes.
where you did this group and all that. But now you were working in Philadelphia for this healthcare quality unit, where there were nurses and others helping many, many human service agencies that each one had lots of people with so-called disabilities, and some of them multiple different labels and issues and stuff like that. And so now you kind of had a larger overarching view and assistance to many, many more people.
Yeah.
Actually.
And more influence, really, because we could see more people, and I could teach about things that, sometimes other people weren't teaching about. But I'll come back to that in just a second, because I wanted to say that I think I'm going to lose my thought. This is where you go, bananas, and then the thought comes back, right?
It's when I stop thinking about it, that's when it re-enters. So if you want to jump ahead, and then we'll come back, or whatever.
Okay. Yeah. So here I was in this HICU, and I continued to teach about the things that I knew about. So, okay, here comes the thought again. When I was back working on my master's degree, I had this amazing opportunity to have a professor who focused on trauma. And well, the opportunity first came to me individually, because there's lots of ways that people learn to cope with their trauma. Sometimes people repeat the pattern of what's happened to them. I didn't do that. Sometimes people reenact what's happened to them. I didn't do that either. Sometimes people use really very unhealthy coping strategies: drugs, alcohol, eating disorders, things like that. Sometimes it's not really a conscious thing, it's just a coping thing, but I didn't do that either. My coping strategy was being competent and being really good at what I did, because the better I was at doing something, the less likely somebody would, hurt me. And so that competence was broken in this class I was taking that had absolutely nothing to do with trauma. Instead, it was a faculty who was using traumatic examples of kids and people that with. And I was like, oh yeah, this is not going very well. I think I'd better go get some therapy. Because if I want to be somebody who, if we're talking about being a service warrior, the treatment that we offer to other people, the interventions, the ideas that we offer to people have to be things that we ourselves would be willing to engage in. And so I felt like it was important for me, for my own personal benefit. But, if I was going to be a therapist, I really needed to take care of my stuff before I could be in any position to help anybody else.
Yep.
So when I finally graduated, I started working for a counseling center on the side. And before that, I took a course in trauma, like people that I don't know, serial killers and rapists and, all these people that were victimizers and victims. And then I went through the sexual assault nurse examiner's program again, not because I necessarily wanted to be somebody working in a hospital doing that, but I wanted to know as much as I could. And I joined a group that this faculty member ran every month, and invited in people from across Philadelphia. I went to Penn, and they would have conversations about how to treat people who had trauma. And some of them represented agencies that treated victims, and some of them represented agencies that treated offenders. The coroner's office was there. A coroner was there from the coroner's office. And they would bring in people that would speak. And so this again was in the early 90s. And I learned about things like eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR, and other kinds of therapies that were being used to treat people that had trauma. So when I went back to the agency, one of my jobs was to begin to teach other people about trauma. So that group that I talked about would be a trauma-informed group, because not that we talked about trauma, but I was informed. And my ability to be informed about what the impact was allowed me to work with them in a particular way that honored their histories, whether I knew their history or not. When I left there and I moved on to the HICU, I became the person that would teach about trauma. And I did that for quite a long time, even when I was the administrator, because I was the person that started it. And so I was the person that continued to do it. And I taught a lot, and I learned a lot about teaching during that time, because many of the people who we went to teach, the caregivers who we wanted to influence, we wanted to increase their ability to be empathetic and compassionate and informed about taking care of folks, weren't necessarily inclined to be educated and educated by us. And so sometimes I would walk into a room and there would be an agency full of people, and I'd say, I'm here to talk about trauma. And one time, just as an example, it happened that the group in the room, people were reading the newspaper and they were having conversations, and we could not get their attention. So I said, well, okay, we're just going to take a quick break. And my co-facilitator and I cooked up a whole different plan. We said, people want to talk. Let's give them a chance to talk. These people probably know something about trauma. Let's find out what they know. And maybe if we do that, we might be able to add in some things that maybe perhaps they don't yet know. Mm-hmm. So they weren't too happy though with this plan.
I bet. They had to put their newspapers down.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we divided them up. We made them count off so they weren't sitting next to their friends.
Mean teacher that you are.
There's always a method to my madness. Exactly. But the person who from the very beginning was reading the newspaper and most reluctant to be engaged in this whole stupid training became the person in the end who said to all the other people in the group, excuse me, but Ginny's talking.
I've been there. And I'm always amazed, like, that's the one? All right. Do we have to go through all this in order to get there?
Yeah.
Yes.
And so over and over again, of course, we had people that were mandated to come. They had better things to do. They didn't know why they were there. They didn't even know what we were going to be talking about. And this really, for me, honed my skills in being an educator, so that in my next chapter, when I had an opportunity to begin to teach in a university, now teaching, so even though I'm a psychiatric clinical nurse specialist. I've been certified and have my PhD in nursing and all those things. I actually only have taught in social work. And I did that because I want to work with people who look at a whole person. And that happens in social work. And social workers are advocates. And they are people that work with vulnerable populations and oppressed people. And it just seemed like an opportunity to, again, help people understand about how to take care of people who have really had a hard time in their life, right? And all that stuff came in handy when they asked me to teach. First, I taught assessment and diagnosis of mental health conditions, but I did such a good job that they asked me to teach research, which nobody ever wanted to teach because it's ever so unpopular. And most of the people that taught it were like dry and boring. And
Absolutely.
so I thought, well, how are these students any different than the newspaper reading people from my earlier experiences? They're not. I just have to figure out a different way to engage them. And so I did. And I came up with plenty of other ideas, which then led to some different ways that other people were teaching that too. I eventually began teaching about trauma again, and I teach mainly master's level students. I teach some doctoral students about qualitative research, but most of my students are in the master's program. And now we have a clinic for vulnerable adults, and we see people with ID, intellectual difficulties. We see people that are homeless. We see people with mental illness. We see older adults. I mean, we really see just about anybody who is interested or willing or in need of some kind of care. We have a number of interns, and I'm the clinical director. So it's my job to teach them about how to interact with people who have the most challenges. These are people that most people won't even offer therapy to. But because of my own experiences and working as a therapist for all these years, these last almost 30 years, after a while, I worked with regular people for a little while, but I always worked with people with intellectual differences. And then I said, forget regular people. I'm just going to work with people with, and I would take people that were therapy rejects. You know, other therapists said, I can't work with this person. They don't have insight. They can't talk to me. They don't not going to understand what I'm telling them. They can't explain to me what they're learning. I never cared about that. I cared about helping people understand what might have happened to them. And here's a new way of coping. And started using things like biofeedback and EMDR, which doesn't require a lot of talking. And I had great results with these folks. You know, these were people that didn't like to go to therapy. And they came every time to see me. I feel like I'm bragging though. I'm not good at bragging.
No, but it's truth. It's truth. And it's not bragging. You're just speaking your truth and what you've seen and what you've learned. And it's changed not only those people directly, but many of us on the sidelines, and seeing that there is truth. You know, many of us were pushing and prodding and pulling and not always as nice as you, that, you know, our mutual friends, these folks, we knew that there was a brain inside and that was a real person. And even though maybe they didn't speak or they communicated in other ways that we weren't chalking up as even communication, they were a real person and they should be respected and had rights and blah, 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 blah. And you were doing it in a whole different way. You were doing it intrinsically and internally with those people directly, but also all of us on the side as well.
My kitty cat has come to join us.
It sure has. Hi, sweetie. Obviously agrees with all we're saying.
Yes, of course. Nobody ever gets to see her because she's a scaredy cat. So you come in the house, she goes and hides. And
we are honored. We are honored.
Yes. She can't sit in my lap right now, so that's why she's over there.
She's watching.
Yeah. I would say, so I think that, I don't know. I think maybe I've answered some of your other questions in that, like, what has led me all this way has really been, let's really find out what's going on with this person. Let's give them a voice in some way. Let's just first assume, if we have to assume anything, that the person's going to understand what I'm talking about. Let's treat this person like they do understand, that they deserve to know this or be treated in a kind and caring way. And I think that's resulted in a lot of good things. I mean, so if I could just tell one more little story.
Please.
When I worked at the HICU, I started, when I was in the administrative position, I was the director of nursing. And so I said to the nurses, so yeah, we're doing all this training. This is great, but I don't think it's quite enough. We need to be teaching people themselves about the health conditions that they have. And one of the reasons was that I sat on a committee in Philadelphia where we reviewed all of the deaths of all of the people with intellectual differences in the city of Philadelphia. And I just was constantly stunned by the number of people that died from preventable conditions. And so I said to these nurses, guess what? We need to teach people about constipation, and we need to teach people about how to, swallowing issues, and so that they can tell us when they have these things and not just die. So they're like, oh, okay. And I said, I'm going to do it too, because I'd already done earlier stuff, right? And I'm going to do it too. So I went to this one training, and this one guy, not verbal, showed up, somebody that would be probably somewhere on the autism spectrum, came with a staff person who was brand new, knew nothing about him. He can't talk. She doesn't know him. And nobody else shows up. It's just the three of us. I'm like, we're going ahead. We're going to do this anyway. As we're sitting there, the guy's holding a rattle. And I noticed that he rattles. He knocks the rattle around and all that stuff. After a few minutes, I said to him, I don't know if this would work, but if I ask you a question and you agree, do you think you could shake that rattle one time? And if I ask you a question and you don't agree, could you shake the rattle twice? I mean, I don't know if he understood what I was saying, right? He couldn't acknowledge to me that he understood. So I asked him a question. And he stopped and he shook the rattle once. And so we went through the next hour doing that over and over again. Shake it once, he'd shake it twice, and he wouldn't really shake it in between. And it just was another, it just reinforced again that we're working with so many people that have minds that work and bodies that don't.
Right.
If you can't force that air over your larynx, nothing's going to come out.
Right.
So I don't know. I feel like we need to keep doing this. And we've been doing the same thing over and over and over again since I started doing it in 1972, when I was pulling clothes out of lockers and putting them on people. I just feel like there's more that we could be doing for people, and we have to think about that.
And where's that 13-year-old Ginny in all of this?
Right. So as mad as I might have been at my dad for making me do this, not even acknowledging that I was in so much pain because my mother died and I cried for years. Actually, the result of it was a skill. that I can use and when I'm teaching other people,
Right.
where I can, listen to people, not be fazed by it, genuinely be open to what they have to say, because I had to practice that for so many years.
Right. You became really good at it, I'm sure. I mean, I know that in you. I know that in you.
Yeah.
That is
I've
one of
become a
your
lot better
strong.
though at talking about things too, though. Yeah.
And I'm glad for that. I'm glad for you for that. Yeah. I know when I first met you, I didn't know much of your story. I remember you kind of alluding to the fact that your mother had died early on in our relationship. But of course, I wouldn't ask. That was, crossing boundaries or inappropriate or
Yeah.
whatever. And it wasn't for years until I heard. In fact, it wasn't until last year when you and our other two good friends, Beth Barol and Susanna Joyce, when the four of us did a kind of a 4-part trauma series webinar, that I heard some more of your story that I hadn't heard. And now today I'm hearing that much more. And it's, incredibly wonderful for me, selfishly, to get to know somebody even deeper. Our good buddy Mary Lapos, who I interviewed just recently for this series, there were a couple parts where I was like, I didn't know that. You did what? Like, oh my, and it added up. I think I heard about your pool shark days, and I keep getting this, I want pictures because I keep getting this image of you in very different clothing and a beer and maybe a shot.
Oh, definitely a beer. Absolutely a beer. And a shot of Granddad too. I don't drink
Oh my
anymore,
God.
but
I know you
yeah.
don't drink. And I think as long as I've known you not to drink.
Yeah,
So,
no. No, I had my drinking days earlier. Yeah.
mhm. so, so what's next for Ginny? What if we checked in with you in 2 years, 5 years from now, or
Mhm.
what's next on your agenda or as some people have a bucket list or whatever,
Yeah.
whether it's work, whether it's fun, whether it's whatever, what's new, what's happening, what else?
Well, I'd say in the next couple of years, I get to wind down a little bit, although my coworkers don't want to hear about this. I am just a couple of years away from being able to retire at 70, right? And but in the meantime, I will continue working, and I have a chance to continue working even after I decide to wind down because I teach online. And so I can teach from my home, which, as you know, makes the world so much easier, not having to go someplace.
Uh-huh.
Thanks to our mutual friend, Beth Barol, I am now working on becoming certified in neurofeedback. So I'm already certified in biofeedback, and neurofeedback is like a part of neurofeedback is a part of biofeedback, one element of it. And we think that this could be actually really quite helpful to a number of our friends that are on the autism spectrum, that have intellectual difficulties,
Mm-hmm.
because we've encountered a number of
Hmm.
neurofeedback therapists who have no intention of working with people with what we might call differences, and yet do, and they're stunned by the results that they get.
Right.
We know people, right? We
We sure
understand
do.
the kinds of things that people might struggle with. So we are working on that, and I expect to be able to continue to do that. I think that would be mainly my work. We unfortunately, because of the whole COVID-19 virus thing, have postponed a vacation that we were going to take in the summer, where we were going to England and
Mm.
Ireland, and we planned actually in England to walk Hadrian's Wall, about 50
Oh.
miles of the 84-mile wall in northern England. So, hey, we have to look on the bright side and say, this just means I have to stay in shape because it would be 10 miles of walking every single day for 5 days in a
There you
row.
go.
So if I had to be in shape for this summer, now I still have to be in shape for another year, and no getting out of that, so that we can go on our vacation and do that.
Mm.
I don't know what else might be on my list. I mean, I really, love spending time with my grandkids, and in a couple of years there'll be more that are in college or
Mhm.
high school, and they grow up so fast,
They do.
and you have to stay engaged with them somehow. Even when they get to be older, it becomes harder to do that because now they have their own friends, and
Mhm. But you have that lovely remembrance that you started us with of the big celebrations, and I know that's what you and Bruce do with the family. You're the center of the family.
yeah,
You're the holder of those gatherings and the party kings and queens.
that's right. Half
That's
party will
awesome.
go. In fact, sometimes they hold a party and I make all the food and take all the food, which is even better because then I don't have to clean my house.
Exactly, exactly. Oh, and we should mention in here your Instagram,
Oh, right. I
your
have Ginny's Main Street Kitchen, which is, I started it because I wanted my adult kids to learn to cook for themselves more. I wanted to give them more things. And so they said, well, you could make a video. So I made a video and try to keep it under 5 minutes because, our attention span is just not that long. And so I did that. And then they're like, you have to put this on Instagram so we can all see it. So now I'm on Instagram, at least with that. I haven't opened myself up to Facebook yet. I'll think
That's
about it, but
awesome. And I remember years ago you had cooking classes
we
with
did.
your kid. I
Yes,
remember
we
that.
did. We had cooking club. Every Sunday we had cooking club.
Mhm.
The kids would show up and we would make all kinds of things together, and then they would stay for hours. Like cooking club was an hour, yeah, on paper, but it was really more like 3 or 4 hours because, they would just come and stay and do all of that. And even right now with all the social distancing and not being able to see everybody, we actually meet up on Sundays on Zoom and play games with the grandkids, and the adults are there the entire time. So we
Awesome.
know that this is really important to all of them. And selfishly, we started this so we
Yeah,
could see our grandchildren
right.
and our kids, of course. But yeah.
How wonderful. So
Yeah.
cool. So we're going to go backwards in time,
Okay.
back to the beginning of this interview.
Mm-hmm.
So that first question that I ask you. So given all of this that we've talked about here today, these wonderful, wonderful stories and insights and learnings. So who is Ginny? Who is Ginny Focht-New?
Hmm. Well, I am, uh, I think I'm still a loving, caring, compassionate, kind, empathetic person who connects with people who have maybe not such an easy life. Um, I am creative, and I'm actually much more intelligent than people realize or sometimes give me credit for. um, I am I'm soft spoken and I am really shy, but I actually am a lot stronger than people realize. And I try to tell people that, but they don't always believe me until it happens that I have to, like the strong part of me has to come out. So um, I don't know. I'm a cook. That's my art, I think. Um, I love to exercise and be healthy. I think that's important for me, and for me to be a role model for my family and for other people. I'm willing to talk about things that I might have struggled with if it helps somebody talk about things that they struggle with, or I'm willing to talk about the mistakes that I've made if it means that then they could be comfortable talking about their own mistakes. I am still a pool player. There
I
is
love that.
something that's still competitive about me. Like it always felt so good. Not only when I won, right? But when somebody came up and took their quarter off the table because they just weren't even willing to try. It just felt right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I think there's a part of you, you've said it in a couple different ways, that likes surprising people and likes being honored and acknowledging that surprise in yourself.
mm-hmm. It is important that people, I mean, I can live my life without people telling me that I do a good job.
Mm-hmm.
But it does really make me feel good when
Mm-hmm.
that happens. I don't
Mm-hmm.
depend on it, but I really like it.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that, the part of me that I really didn't talk about, that is still a part of me that I work on all the time, is the part of me that says, well, you're not as good as, well, you can't really, well, people don't like you as much as, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I still have to struggle with that. That's still a part of who I am. And I think a big part of it, goes back to my arrested development when I was 13, when you're becoming an individual and if you have a caring, loving family around you that allows you to move through that developmental stage. And I just didn't have that. I had an alcoholic father and a crazy stepmother and all these other people that were awful, and no way of moving forward, being so overwhelmed by my mother's death, like not being able to see beyond that. You can't take in information if there's this barrier there. And so I've always been delayed in everything that things that I learned to do. I can learn it and I'm good at it, but I don't learn it I haven't learned it at the same time as most other people.
Right.
I got my bachelor's degree when I was 30 some years old. I was 50 something when I got my PhD. I'm a little behind in that way. And I think that did contribute to my inability to see my own value sometimes. I see it a lot more now than I ever have. I mean, I do.
I'm glad.
Yeah.
I'm glad. You've been
creeps in
operating.
every once in a while.
I'm sure. But you've been operating in Ginny time.
Yeah.
And that's the perfect time for Ginny.
Yeah.
So thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Rosa.
Thanks for being my buddy.
Yeah. I
Thanks
miss you.
for this. I miss you.
Yeah. But I'm always happy that I can still get to see you.
I know. And technology, be it Facebook, Instagram, Zoom, all of these things. And it's so fun how our worlds have circled kind of apart, back together, apart, back together. It's really fun. And I cherish that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this time that you shared and all your learnings that you've shared with us today, and just everything that you've given the world.
Thank you.
Including your pool playing.
One day we'll talk about how I was a wrestling coach too.
Oh my gosh, I did know about that. That's right. That's right. I did know about that. Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's a whole, and then there's baseball.
Oh yeah. I love my baseball.
Yeah. Thank you, Ginny.
Thank
Love
you.
Bye.
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 This series on being a service warrior is brought to you by Networks for Training and Development Incorporated via funding by the Philadelphia and Northumberland Counties Behavioral Health Intellectual Disability Services in Pennsylvania, and with the help of Joe Sterling of Joe Doggy Productions, Waikapu, Hawaii. Many thanks to all our guests and fellow firewalkers for sharing their wisdom, learnings, and joy with us.